The magnitude of economic recession threat is increasingly stalking Indonesia. This is reinforced by the release of the latest data on Indonesia's economic growth in the second quarter, which fell into the minus zone. Regarding this, the World Bank has even provided a number of recommendations for Indonesia to recover its economy immediately. But before talking further about these recommendations, let's firstly take a look at the latest data on Indonesia's economic growth in the second quarter of 2020. Here it is. Through the graphic, we can see second quarter of 2020 GDP growth based on the spending. Here it is, we can see there is import that is contracted by 16.96%, and moving on to export, which was corrected to be minus 11.66, and then also PMTB with the value that went down 8.61%, and not to mention about government consumptions that went down 6.9%, and PRT consumptions which went down 7.76%, and also household consumptions that minus 5.51%. While for the total, if we compile it through this based on the spending, we can see second quarter growth is only minus 5.32%. And if we assess through the number represents its sharpest downturn since 1998 financial crisis in the second quarter, as the COVID-19 pandemic shut down large parts of the country. And if we take a look at the household consumptions, it may be the number is the smallest of all, but then the household spending, which makes up more than 50% of GDP, fell 5.51%, and for lower than 5.18% growth in the last period of last year. And it can be seen from the data. The contractions of 5% in household is a very far away. And then the household consumptions has a very significant effect on the overall GDP growth. And this is due to large portions of household consumptions in Indonesia's GDP structure, which reach more than 50%. And therefore, up to now, the government continues to issue various ways and strategy to be able to increase household consumptions. And yes, viewers, so with the release of the latest data, will Indonesia's economic prospects become even more grim than this year? The World Bank has even mentioned several estimations for Indonesia, and the information is on the next graphic. Here it is. We can see World Bank's estimations on Indonesia's in 2020. Pretty much bad. First of all, we can see the economic growth will be minus 2% up to 0%. It means there will be no growth at all. And the second one is that when we talk about poverty, World Bank's estimated Indonesia will have a poverty increase by 5 up to 8 million people. And when we talk about unemployment, it is estimated to be 2.6 up to 3.8 million loss of their jobs. And then when we talk about debt hike, it is unfortunately 6.3% of the fiscal deficit, and of course 37.4% government debt to GDP. And the World Bank senior economist, for our information, has predicted that Indonesia's economic growth will slow or not grow this year due to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. And the World Bank projects that Indonesia's economy will not grow in 2020 as an impact of COVID-19 pandemic. The decline occurred in all economic indicators, including increasing unemployment rate, where in the line with the World Bank, the government also predicts that the unemployment rate could increase by 2.92 million people up to 5.23 million people. Meanwhile, in terms of poverty, the World Bank said that if Indonesia was hit by the second wave of 2020 COVID-19, poverty could increase to 8 million people. Then with the massive disbursements of government fund in economic recovery, a widening of fiscal deficit is of course unavoidable. And of course, viewers, so what are the World Bank's recommendations for Indonesia? Let's move on to the next graphic. Through the next graphic, we can see the first strategy from World Bank is about to slope the COVID-19 curve. First of all, increase the PCR test capacity to Indonesian people. And the second of all, expanding the national health system that we have. And then the third one is that trace and isolate the probably it would revert to the lockdown. But whatever happens, to ensure the curve is flattened, we need to continue this behavior of staying healthy. As the number of COVID-19 infections cases in Indonesia continues to increase, which has even exceeded 100,000 cases, the World Bank calls increasing PCR test capacity to be the most important thing, where according to the World Health Organization, which is determined based on the populations, the minimum number of Indonesians' PCR tests is 270,000 per week, or 54,000 people per day. And previously, President Joko Widodo requested that a PCR test must reach 30,000 per day. But this figure is still far from the minimum standard. And therefore, the capacity of laboratories in Indonesia for PCR tests absolutely must be increased, as we know that COVID-19 problem is the starting point of Indonesia's economic downturn. And not only COVID-19 curve, the World Bank also asked Indonesia to overcome the recession curve. The points are in the next graphic. Here it is. We can see the second strategy that is provided by the World Bank is about overcoming the recession curve. First of all, World Bank stated that the improvement and expansions of social assistance targets. And the second of all, World Bank is about to support the business of sectors. And the third one is that capacity enhancement. This is inclusive of formal educations, pre-employment cards, and also labor market informations. And the last one is that close the infrastructure gap. The World Bank stated that the Indonesian government should be aggressive in distributing social assistance to the middle to lower class. This is because the level of demand will increase in Indonesia, in line with the availability of the manufacturer's good after opening of the economic activity. But however, in this case, the crucial issue is the data on the social assistance recipients. So the government's data must be able to present the actual data to ensure that the social assistance provided is on the right target and effective as well. And another thing to suppress the recession curve is that to support the business sector, where the economic recovery cannot only rely on the aspect of demand or consumption alone. Liquidity assistance to businesses affected by the pandemic is urgently needed to stress their productivity so that they are able to meet the community demand. Last but not least, there is still one other strategy recommended by the World Bank. Let's go straight to the next graphic. Here it is, the last one. The third strategy that is provided by the World Bank is about to flatten the debt curve. First of all, World Bank stated to reallocations of subsidies to infrastructure and human capital. And then the second one is that government, through the World Bank, try to extend the income tax coverage. And the third one is that by increasing revenue through excise tax. And regarding debt curve, the World Bank warned Indonesia's government to manage debt carefully, as well as being able to encourage economic growth. Debt can also backfire. An increase in debt will certainly reduce fiscal space if this is not managed properly. Macroeconomic stability in Indonesia, which is a pillar, will also be a challenge in itself and will hinder the economic recovery. So the World Bank demands Indonesia to carry out tax and excise reforms so that the tax ratio increases and the mechanism for using debt can be reduced. And yes, viewers, stay tuned to market headlines because we will be right back after this quick break.